All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to thank you for joining People Elements Unpacking the Elements of Engagement webinar. I want to cover a few housekeeping items. You probably noticed that your lines have been muted. This is just to reduce background noise. If you have questions, use the Q&A function. The Q&A function that's built into Zoom. I actually have some colleagues in the Q&A, and they're going to vet your questions as we move through the presentation. We're going to save some time for questions at the end of this presentation. If we don't get to all of your questions, feel free to reach out to your People Element contact. And if you don't work with People Element, we're going to put an email in the Q&A right now, and you can reach out to us after the presentation. Also, I know a lot of you are going to be taking notes throughout the presentation, but I want to remind everybody this is going to be recorded. So we're going to share the recording with you after the presentation today. All right, I'm actually going to shut my camera off. I think we should focus on the slides here, but I wanted to show you a picture of myself. I wanted to let you guys know you're not being catfished. Before we actually jump into the data, my name is Quentin Barrett, and I'm a People Experience Analyst at People Element. And that's just a fancy way of saying that I spend the majority of my time reviewing employee perception data and presenting to clients across multiple industries. And when I say multiple industries, I'm talking about manufacturing, healthcare, transportation, pretty much any industry you can think of. And when I say employee perception data, I'm talking about data from a variety of surveys. We're talking engagement surveys, exit, new hire, well-being, any kind of employee survey you can think of, we run those surveys. And one of my personal favorite surveys to dive into is an all-employee engagement survey. I can honestly say I love looking at engagement data. Because I truly feel like it's something that every single organization should do on a set cadence. And I feel that way because I've seen it have a positive impact on organizations across the board. I've worked with organizations for 6, 7 years in a row, and I've seen a constant positive impact when they take their engagement data seriously. And each year, People Element creates an engagement trends report as sort of a year-end review. And we highlight trends that we've seen over the past year and even the drivers of engagement across our client base. Now, this report is actually going to be shared with you to download at the end of the presentation, and I encourage you to review the report in detail. There's a lot of good information in there, but today I'm going to actually discuss some of the highlights of that report. I'm going to go through some of the main points with you, and we'll even add a little commentary that's not in the report. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to look at the impact of engagement or the impact of disengagement, depending on how you look at it. And when I say the impact of engagement, what we're going to do here is I'm going to define engagement for you. I'm going to show you how we measure engagement across all of our clients. And I'm going to show you what are the outcomes of engagement. We're going to do that in the very beginning of the presentation because we really want to set the stage here. And then I'm going to show you, when you use our measurement of engagement, how it divides your employees up into different groups. The groups that it divides employees into are like actively disengaged or actively engaged, and there are a few different groups in between. We're going to look at historical engagement. This is going to be really interesting to everybody because we're going to take you through what engagement has looked like for the People Element clients from before the pandemic started all the way up until today. And then we're going to actually focus in on 2022 engagement, and we're going to look at 2022 engagement by quarter. It was an interesting year. So we're going to take you through quarter by quarter and show you how engagement has changed across all of our clients. And because it was an interesting year, I think a lot of us have been dealing with the same workplace trends. We're going to discuss some of these trends that are impacting engagement. And the big reveal, the thing that I want everybody to stick around for at the end here, is I'm going to show you what drives engagement statistically. We're not guessing. I'm going to show you the actual areas and the themes and the items that drive engagement for our People Element clients in 2022. Now, before we do that, before we dive into the data, let's take a look at the methodology of this report. Again, this is research that we're going to be reviewing from our 2023 engagement trends report, but the data is all 2022 data. It's all derived from employee engagement surveys that are powered by People Element. And the survey measures employee engagement from hundreds of organizations across the United States. So you're really looking at a lot of information from all these different industries. And a lot of it, you're going to say, hey, this really correlates with what we're seeing in our organization. Now, again, to set the stage, I want to talk about the impact of disengagement or the impact of engagement. And to do that, I really wanted to define employee engagement. Now, don't worry, the screen's supposed to be blank right now because I want to talk through this. If you Google right now, if you Google the definition of employee engagement, you're going to find hundreds of definitions. And honestly, a lot of those definitions are probably pretty good definitions. But I want to show you my favorite definition of employee engagement. I do this a lot, right? I look at engagement data weekly for 7 years in a row. And this is the one that I'm always drawn to. We're trying to look at the emotional connection that an employee feels towards the organization and its goals. The emotional connection that your employees feel towards the organization and its goals. That's what we're trying to tap into when we measure engagement. And when I say tap into, that's really what I mean, measure. So maybe more importantly to you, we measure employee engagement with an engagement index that's embedded in our surveys. And this index is going to look at some key areas. And those are the key areas that you see right here. The index looks at discretionary effort. Are the employees, based on how they measure themselves, are they motivated to go above and beyond? Are they putting forth effort? Organizational pride. Are they proud to work for the organization? Advocacy. Are you an advocate for the organization? If I bump into you at the bank and I say, hey, do you still work for that company? And you say, yeah, I work there. I love it. You should work there too. You're an advocate for the organization. Feelings of accomplishment from work. This goes back to them having that emotional connection towards the organization and its goals. And last but not least, organizational commitment. Are we committed to the organization? Do we plan on quitting in a week or two, within a year? Or are we committed to the organization long term? And I think a lot of organizations look at one or two of these things and they kind of equate it to engagement. They look at organizational pride and they say, you know what, if you're proud to work for the organization, then you're engaged. And it's a piece of it, but it's not the whole thing. Some people might look at commitment. Hey, if you plan on staying here long term, then you're engaged. Now, that's a piece of it. So we're looking at this entire index and we're getting a really good, consistent, reliable measurement of engagement. And it's a really good metric to track year over year because research shows that if you could increase engagement, and this is not just people element, it's pretty solid research. If you can increase engagement, you get all these positive outcomes. Look what we're showing you right here, right? You get engagement goes up, turnover goes down, accidents go down, absenteeism goes down. Engagement goes up, productivity gets better, sales get better, well-being gets better. These are the outcomes of engagement. You want to understand what you're measuring. You want to understand how you're measuring it. And then some of you are looking at this and saying, hey, I want to get down on some of that engagement. I want to be able to improve engagement in my organization. And you can run an engagement survey. You can use the engagement index that we have, and it's actually going to group your employees into one of 4 different groups. One of 4 groups. It's going to put them into the groups that you see here. I'm actually going to start with what we call actively disengaged. So a percentage of your employees might fall under the actively disengaged group. And I get this question all the time. I'm always presenting to executive leaders. I'm talking to employees and they say, hey, Quentin, what does a completely disengaged employee look like? And when I'm feeling sassy, I might say, hey, it's the opposite of an engaged employee. But I want to give you guys some more detail here. So I've kind of written it out for you. This is what a disengaged employee looks like. They consistently view their work and company unfavorably. They're probably making disparaging remarks or talking negative. They're blaming people. They're pointing fingers, and they might quit, right? And that might be the best case scenario because they might stay and contribute to a negative environment and kind of spread a little bit like cancer. I had a CEO one time. He said, yeah, the ones that don't quit, I call them the walking dead. That's stuck with me for years. He said, I call them the walking dead because they're kind of just shuffling around. They're not doing a great job. They're not putting forth a good effort, and they're making everybody else sick. That's actively disengaged. So hopefully a small percentage of your employees fall within that actively disengaged group. Some might fall within this opportunity group. And I'm not going to read all of these, but in general, you might think that these folks are people who are on the fence, right? They're on the fence. They're just waiting for you to figure out how to make them more engaged. If we can figure out how to make them more engaged, then they'll move to the right a little bit. What you don't want is this opportunity group, these people on the fence, falling to this disengaged group over here and quitting or causing trouble. We don't want them moving in the wrong direction. And then you have these two groups, engaged contributors and actively engaged employees. Now, I want to point out that both of these groups are engaged. It's just that one group, the actively engaged, they scored higher on that engagement index than the others did. A little bit of a higher score, so they're more engaged, but both of these are engaged. So the way we get your engagement level is we add these two groups together. If we add these two groups together, that's what your engagement percentage is in our people element reporting. So if I were to tell you, if you run a people element survey, an engagement survey, and I were to say, well, it looks like you have 45% engagement, it means that 45% of your population that took the survey falls within these two groups right here, engaged contributor and actively engaged. That's an important metric. That's an important thing to know. It's also important to know what percentage falls in this opportunity group or this actively disengaged group. But you definitely want to know what percentage of engagement you have year over year. So now that we're all on the same page, we know what engagement is, we know what the outcomes of engagement are, how we measure engagement. I really want to share our 2022 data with you. I think this is going to be very insightful for everybody. But before we do that, I want to do a quick poll. This is a little bit to let me take a drink of water because I'm going to be monologuing throughout the presentation. But I want to ask you a question here. If you had to guess, what percentage of your workforce is engaged? And before you answer, we're going to put a poll in the Q&A for you to answer. What percentage of your workforce is engaged? What percentage would fall within that engaged contributor and that actively engaged group? I'm going to give you a second to answer that. I'm going to give you just about a minute to answer. Now, some of you work with people element right now. So I'm going to go ahead and call you a cheater. You already know probably. You already know what percentage of your employees are engaged. But the others, go ahead and guess. Guess what percentage of your employees would you think are engaged? So I'll be quiet for about 45 seconds here and then we'll move on. And when we have all the answers, my colleagues are going to share the answers with me. We'll take a look and see what you said. All right, team. Can you share the poll with me? Let's see what everybody said. It looks like the majority of people said 40 to 60%. We thought 40 to 60% would be the percentage that were engaged. 40 to 60%. That's not a bad guess. 40 to 60% is a pretty darn good guess across people element clients. Now that might be for your organization, but across people element clients in 2022, 58%. 58% engagement. That's what it looked like. Now, you guys were definitely within the range, but you might be asking yourself, okay, 58% of engagement across your clients, but you might be wondering what percentage falls within the opportunity group that you just showed us? What percentage falls within the actively disengaged group? And what does this look like historically? This is something you're going to really find interesting because this is historical engagement for the past 4 years. It's a 4-year engagement trend, looking at engagement level. And we're going to go through this year by year. I want to point out 2019 right here. We had 56% engagement in 2019. Okay. And you know what that means? That means that the actively engaged and the engaged contributors, these two engaged groups, you add those together, it equals 56% engagement. But you might want to look and say, hey, how many were in the opportunity group versus the actively disengaged? Well, luckily, you had a bigger chunk in the opportunity group than in the actively disengaged. And you had the smallest group of disengagement right here. But it was 56% engagement in 2019. Then 2020 hit. Everybody knows what happened in 2020. At the time, we didn't know what was about to hit us, but the pandemic ran wild. All of our lives got turned upside down. COVID, I got COVID immediately because I was traveling and talking to clients and touching my face too much. It was a weird way to start the year, and it was new ground for everybody. I want to point that out. Nobody knew what was going to happen because that was a first, right? And as the subject matter expert, as I like to think of myself, I thought for sure that engagement was going to take a nosedive. I thought this is a global pandemic. Engagement's going to go down like crazy. But to my surprise, it didn't. As you can see here, it didn't go down. It actually started trending upwards. We were at 61% engagement in 2020. That's how we ended the year of 2020. And I was still doing executive presentations. I did a little bit of traveling. I was talking to leadership teams, employees, and I was asking questions. I was saying, why does everyone think that engagement's getting better right now during this pandemic? Why do we see an increase in engagement? And I was kind of getting pretty clear answers. The answers were clear. I had people telling me things like, hey, we're all in this together. We have to beat this thing. I'm staying positive for my coworkers, my patients, my clients. I don't want to say it was a good thing, but it was definitely a silver lining to the pandemic. And it is not what I thought was going to happen. But people pulled together. It was kind of heartwarming when you think about it. So we shot up. Engagement level across our client base in 2020 shot up to 61% engaged. Then 2021 came, and I think fatigue set in a little bit, probably because people thought, hey, this is only going to last a couple weeks or 6 months, and it didn't. And then we dropped to 58% engagement. As you can see, the actively engaged got smaller, the opportunity group and the actively disengaged got bigger. And that's the same trend we saw in 2022. By the end of the year, there was no change compared to 2021, which I guess we should be happy about because it still looks better than 2019. And I think that's interesting. I've had somebody ask me here within the last week, they said, well, why do you think engagement didn't go back down to where it was in 2019? And I think because of some of this, I don't know what you want to call it, post-pandemic culture, I think people still held on to a little bit of that. Hey, we have to come together. We have to beat this thing. And it's evening out at around 58% engagement. And there are a lot of different trends that have arisen. And we're going to go over some of those in a moment. But I want to dive into this 2022, this year of 2022. Because to be honest with you, it started out great. When we started measuring engagement in 2022, in Q1, we thought we were going to be back to 2020 engagement levels. By the end of Q1, we were seeing 60% engagement. And we're thinking, man, this is great. This is going to be our clients' engagement levels are trending upward. In Q2, we saw 59% overall engagement. 59%. We started the trend downward, right? Engagement level across the country was trending downward, but you're still hovering around 60%. We can still shoot for that 2020 goal, right? We can still end this year at 60, maybe 61% engagement. Q3, it was 54%. And then Q4, it was 56%. And you know the end of this story. This all evened out at about 58% engagement for 2022. And I hesitate to even say it, but things seemed like they were slowly getting back to normal. We started seeing these different workplace trends arise. And I think that it was all part of this, again, post-pandemic culture, and it really has an impact on engagement. And you're going to recognize some of the trends that I'm going to show you. Some of the things that I think impacted engagement in 2022. One of the things is we started seeing a shifting in expectations. And what does that mean? Well, since the pandemic started, people's expectations, employees' expectations have started changing. To be more specific, they're not just in it for the paycheck anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with coming to work for a paycheck, right? but they're not just in it for the paycheck. They suddenly want more meaningful work. And based on our survey data, most people feel like they get some sort of sense of purpose from their work, but now they want more. And I'll be honest, this is a little bit of a growing pain, I think, but I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I honestly think it's a good thing we came out on the other side with people wanting more from their job, because it helps them make that connection to the organization. I think that's likely why engagement is still better than it was in 2019, because people came out of the pandemic not wanting just a paycheck. They want that connection to their work. Now, the challenge for some organizations is that employees want less work and they're focused on their work-life balance more than ever. And they're focused on these different facets of well-being more than they ever were before. In fact, what we're finding is that a lot of employees, they would even consider taking a lower wage now, as long as they were able to get their work-life balance in check. And that's why I call it shifting expectations. Those are things that were not true back in 2019. Speaking of shifting expectations, I think most of you will agree, a lot of employees got a taste of working from home, this flexible work. They got that taste of working from home during the pandemic, and it tasted good. And workers with full schedule flexibility, they started reporting better productivity, better ability to focus. In general, employees report positive outcomes associated with flexibility in remote or hybrid work. Now, if you ask me, my opinion here, I think this is still unfolding. I'm really keeping a close eye on these perceptions of flexible work, working from home, things like that. What I'm 100% sure of is that employees do not want employers to take away that flexibility that they were allowed during the pandemic. And I know the other side of that coin is a lot of leaders aren't sure if they want to keep offering that flexibility. But if you had to ask me, I do think there's some common ground here. I do think organizations can create policies and they can support and guide a flexible workplace. And the reason I think that is because People Element did it. The company I work for did a pretty good job of this, a pretty good job of adapting and saying, you know what, we see where this is headed. We're going to start offering some more flexible work ability for the employees. And we still manage to keep that connection and stay engaged. Stress and burnout. In 2022, stress and burnout reached levels that we hadn't seen since the height of the pandemic. And when you first think of that, you might think, why? You know, things are getting better. Why is stress and burnout the same as it was during the height of the pandemic? Because burnout leads to decreased morale, lower engagement, more turnover. But I think it's important for us to all look at this and remember, there wasn't really a concrete end date to the pandemic. It's not like we hit a certain day of the month and everybody said, hey, it's over. Many people are still dealing with it. They're dealing with the after effects of the pandemic, and they're dealing with other things that happened in 2022 that started impacting their perceptions. Things like pressures of economic uncertainty. When I say after effects, I mean things like economic uncertainty, growing inflation rates, general cost of living, world politics. Everybody knows what I'm talking about here. These things seep into our workplace. They seep into our perceptions of our workplace. And it seems a bit disingenuous to say that things are back to normal, because as you can see, these workplace trends, they're not necessarily back to normal. They may not ever be back to quotation marks normal. And all of the trends that we're looking at here, all these trends that we saw in 2022, they're impacting employee engagement. They definitely have an impact. But here's the magic trick. This is the thing that I think most of you are waiting for. I'm going to show you specifically what drives engagement statistically. I'm not guessing. I'm going to show you what we call key drivers of engagement for all of our clients across the year 2022. Before I do that, I want to do another quick poll here. I want to ask you a question. If you were to ask your leaders, think of the place you work. If you were to go out and ask your leaders and your managers, what's the one thing they would say drives engagement? We're going to put a poll up. We're going to give you some multiple choices. But what do you think is the one thing that they would say drives engagement? And then I'm going to show you what the drivers of engagement were across the People Element client base in 2022. So let's give it just a minute. We're going to give it about 1 minute and give everybody a chance to answer. What would your leaders, what would your managers say drive engagement? I work with a lot of clients, and a lot of them have their theories, they have their hypotheses. They feel like they know what drives engagement. They'll come to me and say, this is really what the issue is. This is what makes people disengage. And then you run a survey, and you might find out that they're right, or maybe it's something they never thought of. Let's see what you think your leaders would say. It looks like most people said growth and development. And I think this is interesting. A lot of you said well-being. Well-being, and the lowest was compensation and benefits. I feel like you guys are cheating here. Those were too good. You're really, really close. Really, really close to what I'm about to show you. Very, very good guess. Let's see what the drivers of engagement are across our clients. Now, I know you were answering that based on what you think your leaders would say. And those would be some pretty insightful leaders. Before I show you the key drivers of engagement, I want to really talk about how we determined what drives engagement. So in short, we take that engagement index that I showed you, the one that looks at intention to stay and whether you're proud to work for the organization and all those things. And then we run a correlation against every other item in the survey. And what we're looking for are items that have a positive correlation with engagement. So meaning in general, if these items go up in score, engagement goes up in score, likely. If these items go down in score, then engagement is likely to go down in score. So these 5 leading drivers of engagement that I'm about to show you, I want to point out, they are not the lowest items in the survey, right? That would be a whole nother webinar. These are the lowest scoring items with the highest impact on engagement. Think of them as your sweet spot. If you have anything in common with all the clients that ran surveys in 2022 with us. Growth and development. Well, you guys hit it, right? You said growth and development. You said your leaders would probably say growth and development, and they would be in line with what we saw in our data. Company communication. That was another one that came up. Employee voice. Well-being. I think it's interesting that a lot of people said well-being. I wonder if this was a few years ago, if people would have said that. People would have even thought like that. But well-being is showing up as being one of the drivers of engagement. And then feeling valued, just in general, feeling valued. Now, each theme you see here have multiple items or areas that make up that. And we're going to look at those in more detail. But I think when we look at these, a lot of these make sense. They make sense when you think of the workplace trends that we just reviewed, right? Those shifting expectations, that need for flexible work, stress and burnout. And then some of these, they're just common drivers of engagement. They're just very typical. They were drivers of engagement before the pandemic. They're drivers of engagement now, and they're likely going to be drivers of engagement years to come. It's just, I've looked at this data for many years, and they're things that I'm very, very used to seeing. So I want to break each one of these down. I want to give you guys some really, really good information to help you improve engagement at your organization. And I want to break each one of these drivers of engagement down, because likely these drivers of engagement are drivers of engagement for the place you work as well. Let's take it one by one. Let's look at growth and development. Now, the items that showed up as having a correlation with engagement from growth and development are the areas where people feeling like they had the opportunity to be promoted, being provided with professional growth opportunities, having someone who encourages their professional development. Those were the areas that were correlated with engagement. Now, growth and development, this is one of those long-standing themes that drives engagement. One of the ones that I said, hey, it was always a driver of engagement, and it probably always will be a driver of engagement. It's one of those long-standing themes. In general, employees want to know that there's a path forward. They want to know that they can grow with an organization. And it's not hard to see how that can help them form that emotional connection to the organization and its goals. Remember that definition of engagement. And if I can be candid with everybody on the call, I see a lot of organizations sort of throw up their hands with growth and development. I hear people see that as being drivers of engagement, and they kind of say, well, Quentin, I don't know what to do about this. We can't promote everybody, or we can't give everybody a raise. Because you see, they're making these assumptions. They assume that it's about people want growth and development because they want more money. Or they assume that growth and development means we got to promote everybody. But this is very actionable data, in my opinion. I've seen organizations make great progress in this area. When you think of something like growth and development, you got to remember that this is employee perception data. The employees might perceive that there's not opportunities for growth and development. And you got to think, why do they think that? It could be because they want to be promoted. It could be because nobody's talked to them about their growth. It could be because they don't know what cross-training opportunities are available. If you're in healthcare, maybe you want to learn how to use a certain machine. If you're in transportation, maybe you want a different route. There's all sorts of different things that can impact someone's perceptions of growth and development. And it's a very actionable area. So some actions that some organizations take, they consider promoting employees into additional levels within their existing role. That's how they address growth. They create a path where there wasn't a path before. Think about this. Think of an example. Let's say you have a department that's filled with a bunch of engineers, right? Engineers, and you're thinking, well, we can't promote everybody. They already have a manager. They're already an engineer. We don't know what to do here. Well, some organizations will create a path for them. They'll create engineers 1, engineers 2, engineers 3, and give them a way to progress in their role. That's good for the employee. It's good for the organization. Years from now, you might be looking at those engineer 3s and saying, hey, I think we have another manager on our hand here, right? They've progressed. Some organizations really focus on fostering a one-on-one conversation between employees and managers to help them better understand what their employee interests are and what their development needs are. Again, you don't necessarily know what growth and development means to somebody unless you have somebody sitting down. You can ask the question in a survey, by the way. You can get more information. But it's very, very good to have someone sit down one-on-one, a manager, and talk to them about their career. That's a big one. That's a huge one. I've seen that be successful so many times. And you want to communicate clear and transparent career paths and succession plans. It's funny, a lot of organizations have career paths, succession plans, but not a lot of them communicate those well. So growth and development drives engagement. You guys see exactly what drives engagement, those actual drivers there. And I've given you some areas to work on, and this could help increase your engagement. Company communication. So here's a funny story about company communication. When the People Element team released this engagement trends report, and I saw what the drivers of engagement were, what I just showed you a moment ago, the first thing I said was, hey, where's senior leadership? What about perceptions of leadership? I said, I know perceptions of leadership drive engagement. I look at this data every day. There's something right. There's something wrong with this report. There's something not right here, because I know perceptions of leadership is a driver of engagement. And of course, I was told, hey, settle down, keep reading, look at what the drivers are under company communication. And I read them, and I saw that it was sufficient communication from leadership. It was being informed about matters that affect them, just in general, but then it was leadership communicating a clear vision for the future. And there it was. It came out. It came out in communication. And I can't stress this enough for everybody listening here. The way employees view senior leadership is almost always a driver of engagement. Almost always. Seriously, it's like 9.5 out of 10 times. The way employees view senior leadership is a driver of engagement. And I find myself having these conversations with clients over and over. And I always tell them, it almost always boils down to communication. Are we, because how does an employee, a frontline employee, know that senior leadership values them if they're not communicating with them? Right. And we're going to come back to that here in a moment. I think the items show how important senior leadership is. So what do we do to increase these perceptions of communication? Well, one, you want to deploy multiple delivery mediums. You don't just want to rely on email. You want to have town hall meetings, videos, team chats, recorded messages. You're trying to really hit everybody's communication style here. You want to make sure that you're going above and beyond and improve bottom line. And what I mean by that is weave your vision and values into day-to-day activities. Make sure that employees know how their job impacts the vision and the goal that the company has. They need to feel connected to that. Remember, they want that emotional connection to the organization and its goals. So we want to connect what they do to your vision and values. And you want to make sure the managers are on your side. You want to give those frontline managers time and answers and backup to communicate the information you want to get to employees. What you don't want is an us versus them mentality. You don't want the managers to have that attitude that, hey, this came from upstairs. This is not our idea. Leadership told us to do this. And then perceptions of managers may get better, but perceptions of senior leadership goes down. No, you have to get them on your side. You got to communicate with them really well too, because they have a big impact on how employees view senior leadership. And I always say this, in my experience, looking at this data, senior leadership is usually doing a lot of cool things behind the scenes. They usually have a bunch of cool plans in place. They just don't always have the best PR strategy. If you're in leadership, you have to communicate your wins. You have to communicate the things that you're doing to make this a better place to work. That's how you build that connection with the employees. And communication, by the way, this is something that I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but it's something that you're always going to be working on. It's like going to the gym. You don't go to the gym for a few months and then say, well, I'm done. Let's go to Popeyes. I'm hungry. No, communication, you're going to work on it. You're going to tweak it a little bit. You're going to work on it. You're going to tweak it a little bit, and you're going to keep working on it. You're going to realize, well, you know what? These town hall meetings we were doing, maybe they're not having the impact we thought that they used to have. So we're going to change it up a little. And a lot of the times, just having your employees see that you're always working to improve communication, you're always trying something different, that goes a long way. That goes a long way in improving their perceptions of communication. Employee voice. Now, this one's exactly what it sounds like. An employee voice. They're talking about feeling encouraged to share opinions, to share feedback, feeling like their ideas and suggestions are given consideration. That's employee voice. These are also, just like I said about growth and development, these are very common drivers of engagement. In short, I know it's shocking, right? Employees want to be heard. They want to be heard. And you can build an environment of psychological safety. You want to work to create a culture where they feel safe to voice their opinions without this fear of being judged or somebody coming back and attacking them for it. And I said I would come back to this one-on-one meetings with managers, but you want to promote deeper one-on-one conversations between managers and direct reports. That's very important. Let's look at a couple of these, actually. I know a really, really good way to make people feel safe, to make your employees feel safe voicing their opinions without fear. You run an engagement survey, what we're actually talking about right now. You run it on a set cadence. You build trust in the process. You make sure they know if it's a confidential survey, you make sure they know it's confidential. And you straight up tell them that this is a way for us to hear your voice and to take action. And it's a way for you to feel safe and secure given that feedback. These surveys are a huge opportunity to increase perceptions around employee voice. And we know that employee voice drives engagement. Also, talking about these one-on-one conversations with managers, I have a lot of clients that ask questions like, did your manager check in with you on a regular basis? Or does your manager check in with you on a regular basis? Yes or no? Just a yes or no question. And people who have these check-ins, people who have this one-on-one time with their managers, they are almost always across the board, they have more favorability towards the organization than people who don't have one-on-one check-ins with their managers. This is a hill I'll die on, guys. I'll make a grand statement right now. If you hold your managers accountable to checking in with their employees in a one-on-one setting regularly, your employees are going to be far more favorable towards the organization than if you don't. It's going to improve engagement. It's going to improve favorability overall. It'll likely improve growth and development even because you're having a chance to have those questions or have that conversation. Well-being. Now, these are drivers of engagement that I feel that they're a product of our time, right? These aren't things that I saw 4 years ago. Think of all those workplace trends we talked about that we discussed earlier, the flexible work, they want meaning in their work, all this economic uncertainty, stress and burnout. Well, look at these drivers. Look at these things that are driving engagement. Having the resources and support to manage your stress, being supported in maintaining a work-life balance, having sufficient staff to handle your workload. We see these workplace trends pop up that I talked about, and suddenly we have these new drivers of engagement. What can we do? You want to help managers promote a model of healthy boundaries between work and home. You want them to lead by example. You don't want managers not knowing how to cut it off, right? It's after hours. Maybe you're people who work remote. Maybe you're on teams and you're working, and your employees see that and they say, well, that's what's expected now, right? It's 5 o'clock or whatever time somebody is supposed to get off, and they say, I have to stay late, or I have to stay online, I have to work late. You want your managers to promote a healthy boundaries here. You also want to train leaders and managers and all employees to navigate mental health at work, to have those difficult conversations and be supportive, and make resources available for employees and make sure you're communicating those. I've worked with organizations that have things like hotlines that employees can call. And then I speak to the employees and they're like, really? We had a hotline? They're not necessarily communicating the resources that are available to them. And adding a little bit to this, I'll talk about this one here, having sufficient staff to handle the workload. I think this is another area in which organizations sort of feel powerless to act on sometimes. Because a lot of the times in your head, you see that and you think the only action I can take, or the only action to take, is to hire more people. And you can't always hire more people. But again, this is perception data. You want to take a step back and you want to realize that employees feel like there's not sufficient staff to handle the workload. And there may not be. Maybe you actually need to hire more people, but that feeling could stem from a lot of other things. It could be lack of manager support. It could be inefficient technology. It could be scheduling issues. The perception sometimes comes from things that you wouldn't think of. So you really got to be a little bit of a detective. That's why these surveys are so important. You don't just have the score for these items. You have qualitative data. You have comments that you can read, and sometimes they'll give you a lot more detail. Last but not least, I want to talk about feeling valued. And there's a reason that I saved these drivers for last. I saved these for last because you're looking at feeling valued at work, feeling that leadership values employees. Those are drivers of engagement. Now, if I would have started with these, I think a lot of you would be thinking, Quentin, that's not very actionable, because you're not telling me what makes an employee feel valued. What makes them feel valued? And you're right. You're right to think that. Feeling valued, it's almost always a driver of engagement. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, feeling valued is such a common driver of engagement that it's almost a decent measurement of engagement in and of itself. Feeling valued is an outcome. And if you do a good job, think of it like this. If you do a good job making sure that employees feel like they have growth opportunities, you're communicating with them well, you give them a voice, you support their well-being. You guys see a pattern here, right? I'm just reviewing all the key drivers we just talked about. If you do all those things, then they're going to feel more valued. They're going to feel more valued. So it's an outcome of those things. Now, the number one suggestion from employees is for leaders to be transparent and provide frequent, authentic communication. Goes back to that leadership communication. And leaders have an opportunity to build trust and confidence simply by acting on the feedback, showing that they value their employees' opinions. And yeah, that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give you, is that you need to act on this data publicly. And let me help everybody on the call here. Let me help you avoid a common pitfall. When you get your survey results back, you don't want to send an email from a common HR email as a follow-up. Hey, thanks for taking the survey. No, your follow-up should come from senior leadership. Your employees need to know that senior leadership heard them. I always say this, but think of how many birds you can kill with one stone. How many birds can you kill with one stone? Just by following up from senior leadership, they feel like they have a voice. They feel like they're valued by senior leadership. They feel like there's better communication at the organization. All those things drive engagement. So if you don't remember anything else from this webinar, remember that you do not want to miss the golden opportunity to let your employees know that their feedback made it all the way to the top. And then leadership can keep them in the loop regarding action plans and the steps that they're going to take. So that's it. We just went through all the drivers of engagement across our client base in 2022. I want to leave you with this. You can't fix what you don't know. I honestly feel like I've just given you some pretty potent ammunition to help you increase your employee engagement today. But because many of the drivers of engagement that we just looked at, that we just discussed, they're likely driving engagement for your organization right now. But also there's drivers that are specific to your organization, things that you'll never be able to pinpoint if you don't take action. Maybe your organization, maybe a driver of engagement is perceptions of compensation or perceptions of immediate management. Maybe it's some sort of cultural issue that's driving engagement where you work. But you can't fix those things if you don't know about them. So I encourage you, run an engagement survey, run it on a set cadence, prioritize this process every year of collecting data, of taking action annually. If you take it seriously, it will be one of the most valuable and impactful things that you do. I will stand by that statement. If you take your engagement survey seriously, it's going to be one of the most valuable and impactful things you do at work. So I appreciate your time today. I hope this was valuable to you. We still have some time for some questions, so we're going to hang on the call a bit longer to see if you have any questions. We're also going to share the full engagement trends report with you, and you can read through it, go over it with a fine-tooth comb. But let's see what kind of questions we have. Someone said, can you please share some of the questions that are included in the survey? Well, those were some of the questions that we went over, right? They weren't worded exactly how we word them, but things like, I feel like I have my ideas and suggestions are given consideration. I feel like there's opportunity to be promoted with well-being. I feel like there's sufficient staff to handle the workload. Those are examples of some of those survey questions that are in our surveys. Somebody asked when they should expect to receive the recording. It should be today sometime, or maybe tomorrow. Somebody asked, why are the thresholds for being considered engaged as high as they are, if I understand them correctly from the calculation provided on the People Element website? Why is the thresholds for being considered engaged as high as they are? That might be something we have to send out after the presentation. There's a whole calculation that we run to measure engagement. So we might have to send that out to you guys afterwards. Let me see if I can find some other questions here. Somebody just said thank you. So I think we might have answered all the questions. We've provided you the email that you can reach out to if you have any questions. Anything else? Somebody mentioned something about a gift card. I'm not aware of a gift card, but I'll get with my team and see what the process is there. All right, thanks, Elsa. We got a great job. I hope this was valuable for you. We don't want to cut you guys off. We want to give you a chance to ask questions. So anything else before we let you go, feel free to put it in the Q&A right now. Somebody asked, anything specific one should be looking for while deciding on an engagement platform? Why should you choose it and why should you not choose it? I think it's just important when you're looking at an engagement platform, it's important that you look at the reporting capabilities, that you're happy with the type of reporting you're going to get. It's going to vary. You're going to get a lot of the same thing across different vendors, but it's going to vary. And I think if you're specifically looking for engagement, you need to make them tell you how they measure engagement, right? You need to make sure that they have a valid and reliable measurement of engagement that they use across their clients, and just see how that's going to be reported out, because that's going to make it more valuable for you. How frequently does PE recommend running engagement surveys? That's a good question. I recommend running an engagement survey annually. I think you should run it once a year at the very least, and run it at the same time every year. Because you have some organizations that say, listen, I'm going to run it every other year. I think if anything, the last few years have taught us there's a lot that can happen, within 2 years. So sometimes if you run an engagement survey every other year, man, your data has changed so much that you almost have to start from scratch. So as a best practice, I think you should run it annually at the same time, and maybe even do a little mini check-in every 6 months just to make sure that the actions you're taking are working. Somebody said, was this webinar recorded? Please send a copy. Yeah, we're gonna send a copy of the webinar to you. Can you briefly touch on the pulse survey? Why is it important to do? If you're talking about what I said, the survey in between engagement surveys, I'm not saying you always have to do that. Well, it looks like Allie's going to answer that question in the Q&A. So I guess I'll let her answer that. All right. What other questions do we have? I'm still looking at the Q&A. It is recorded. We are going to send a copy, and you're going to have a copy of the engagement trends report. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. This was awesome. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for listening. I hope this was valuable, and we're going to let you go, and you have a good rest of your week. Okay.